Hey everyone, what's up? Mara here, and welcome to another video. In this one, we are going to be talking about the hardware of my new build. If you have no idea what I'm referring to, I did just recently release a video detailing, overviewing what is in my new build, currently in its current form. Link in the description if you haven't seen it, but that is what this video is going to be about. We're going to be going over the hardware choices I made, why I made them, the dilemmas I faced when making them, whether they were giant wastes of money or whether they ended up being necessary. This video is not going to be will not have any of the water cooling stuff or the paint scheme, color matching, none of that, none of the modification stuff like that. We're just going to be talking strictly hardware. It's going to be a long video, but there will kind of be something at the bottom or somewhere on the screen that indicates what we're talking about and how long we're talking about it for. So some of these things have stories to them. So get ready for story time. But without further ado, let's jump right into this here. So we'll start with the CPU. I've got an Intel Core i7-5960X. It is currently the top dog, 8-core CPU. Even still as I record this here at the end of May 2016, it is still the top dog consumer chip with 8 cores. 8 cores, 16 threads, of course. So how did I really need this? Did I really need this piece of hardware? Was it necessary? So if anyone has been part of this channel for quite some time, I did do a prior build video for my prior setup, which was a 4930K 6-core X79 system. It's a very nice system. I still have that system. But what I was trying to do was YouTube had recently announced that they were doing 4K videos at 60 frames per second. So prior to that, they were doing 4K, but only 30 frames per second. It was kind of a turnoff. I wanted 60 frames per second because it's nice and fluid and smooth, right? So they had recently announced that. This is like summer 2015. And I thought, this is it. This is where we're going to make the move. We're going to make the move to 4K right here, right now. This is the sign. Let's do this. So I tried to record in 4K, and anyone... If you've ever watched any of my other gameplay videos and multi-boxing related videos, I'm always capturing the desktop. So you can see ISBoxer, you can see the main game client, you can see the background game clients, you can see everything, right? And that's when you capture the desktop, it always takes more resources to do so. It's a lot different than just capturing the base game client. So I tried capturing at 4K and I failed miserably. Absolutely miserably. Unfortunately, I could not pinpoint where I was failing. The output video was, the frame rates were erratic, stuttering, speeding up, slowing down. Audio was way out of sync at times. It just didn't make, I couldn't use it. Completely unusable. It was garbage. So then obviously I started to troubleshoot and try to figure out where the problem was. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure it out. Thought it was disk I/O maybe, but I always record to SSDs. I've been recording to SSDs for years now. And some people thought that the SSD was a little too slow. So I thought, okay, so how do we speed this up? So I created a RAM drive to record to. I got the exact same results. So it wasn't a disk I/O bottleneck or anything like that. The CPU was not being pegged at 100%. It was not even being worked all that hard. So I was really unsure where this was happening. My buddy Crumb, I was on Windows 7 at the time. He's having me doing this deep analytical tool that will look at the processor and the threads and what is all happening when I'm trying to record. We looked at that data. Nothing made any sense because it all showed that I should be able to record at a nice, smooth 60 frames per second. But of course, these were all CPU bound programs, right? And they were all legitimate. I wasn't like pirating shit from 2 years ago and wondering why it wasn't working, right? So it was all legitimate bought. Everything was up to date with what it was supposed to be. Several different programs I tried and they were just failing left and right. So, I didn't know what was going to fix it. I didn't know what the problem was, so I didn't know how to fix it. Was it a Windows 7 problem? Was it the fact that I maybe just needed more cores? I don't know. So it wasn't... I ultimately decided that I was going to go with the 5960X because it was the next step up. It was the only option I had to go from 6 cores to 8 cores, but it was an incredibly expensive 2 cores that I was paying for, right? So the 5960X is $1,000. I moved from 6 cores to 8 cores. I only gained 2 cores for that amount of money. It was not an easy decision to make. It was not an easy decision to make at all. what also made it a difficult decision is that Haswell E, the X99 chipset, had already been out for at least a year at that point. Something right around there. Over a year, probably. And what was going to happen was the X99 refresh was going to happen soonish. But nobody had any idea when that was happening. The leaks, everything was pretty locked down. Intel was pretty good at keeping all of this information locked down. So there's very little information on when we were expected to see Broadwell E with the X99 refresh. But what I was basing this on was the X79 refresh and the way that X79 played out. So X79 brought us Sandy Bridge E. The 3960X, whatever the top dog Sandy Bridge E chip was a 6-core. And the step below it, which was much more affordable, was still a 6-core. Okay. So then the X79 refresh came along, Ivy Bridge E was released, and we still only had a 6-core. All the way at the top. So the 4960X, whatever it was called, was a 6-core. The step below it, the 4930K, which is what I have in the other system, was still a 6-core. So they went 6-core, 6-core, refresh, 6-core, 6-core. They didn't kick the cores up, right? So then X99 came around, Haswell E was released, came out with the 5960X, 8-core. And then one step down from that was the 6-core. The 5820 and the 5830, I believe, are the two 6-cores that sit below that. Much more affordable options. So, based on X79's history and the way it played out, I was just assuming that the X99 refresh might bring some nicer motherboards like the X79 refresh did, but it was going to keep the 8-core and then 6-core type of hierarchy setup, right? The way that it's all laid out. But weeks after I bought the 5960X, there was a leak. I believe it was a shipping manifestation that showed that Intel had a 6950X, and it was a 10-core. Now, of course, that was just a rumor. It was just a leak. Anything could be wrong. It could have been a big, giant lie. But I was, I was worried. I was thinking, oh, my God, should I just wait? Should I try to sell the CPU? The thing was, I bought the CPU from Newegg, and they don't allow refunds on CPUs. You can't just buy a CPU, say you don't want it, and get your money back. They don't allow for refund. They'll replace it within 30 days, but after that, they want you to deal directly with the manufacturer. They will not give you your money back on the CPU. I think they have too many people that make. I think CPUs are a very weird market, so they sell them. They have their policy. We don't want it back. So I couldn't just send it back and wait, right? Plus, I wasn't even sure. If this was just a leak, who knew if it was true or not? So, but here we are at the end of May, and as I said previously, the 5960X is still the top dog. So the X99 refresh did not come as soon as I thought it may have been coming. But recently, just within the past few days, just earlier this week, there was yet another leak. It looks fairly concrete. Of course, anything can be photoshopped on the internet. Of course, no doubt. It looks fairly concrete, though. And it's showing that 10-core chip priced at $1,700. Yeah, that's a little expensive. It shows the 10-core at $1,700. It shows an 8-core below it, still at $1,000 and some change, and then the 6-core below that. So, based on that leak, it seems like the 5960X was a good purchase back 8 months ago at this point. And I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that. If you would have asked me back then, because, it was difficult enough to spend $1,000 for 2 cores, but if the other option was $1,700 for 4 cores, it would have been an easy decision. I would have not gone for the $1,700 option. There is a limit to my spending at times. That's just way too much money. And maybe just to touch on this, some people might be talking about why weren't you looking at Xeons? Xeons do have 8, 10, 12 core options available, and they did at that point in time too. The problem with Xeons is that, first of all, they're generally clocked pretty low. So they're generally clocked in the 2 gigahertz range for the more affordable ones. We'll just call them the more affordable ones. They're clocked in the 2 gigahertz range. And unfortunately, I want to say all Xeons are locked, but I don't know how true that is. There may be some unlocked Xeons, but then again, the ones that are probably unlocked, they're clocked above 3 gigahertz, and they start at $2,000. It just was never an option. I can get the 5960X, 8 cores, overclock the crap out of it like I currently have it at 4.5 gigahertz, and it's sitting there and it's not even sweating. So it's just hanging out at 4.5 gigahertz, and it's faster. A 4.5 gigahertz 8-core CPU is most likely faster than a 10-core in the 3 gigahertz range. So, and half as much money. So there's that. So that's why we went with the 5960X. And it wasn't a fun option because I knew I had to move to a whole new motherboard, whole new set of memory and all that. But I did it. So I did it. So that's the CPU. Oh, so one thing I forgot to talk about with the CPU is that I don't even know if the 2 additional cores were helpful. I have no idea because sometime between moving from the 4930K and getting the 5960X, I discovered Shadowplay, which is an NVIDIA recording program based through their drivers. So it uses the GPUs to record instead of the CPU. And it captures the desktop at 4K effortlessly, flawlessly, smooth as butter, no problems. Had I known about Shadowplay before, I don't actually know when Shadowplay came out and how good it was at doing 4K when it first came out, if it was even capable of doing 4K when it first came out. I'm unsure of those. But had I known of Shadowplay, had it been something that was on my radar for a recording program at that time, it is debatable whether or not I would have had to have upgraded to a 5960X still at that point. I'm leaning towards the fact that I probably could have stayed on the 4930K system and been okay recording with Shadowplay, taking all that load off of the CPU, trying to record, and just sticking with Shadowplay and recording with the GPUs, I think. But at this point, it's kind of an unknown, so that's that. Okay, so next on the list is the RAM. So I had to move to DDR4. Obviously, I just said that. We just had to move to the X99 chipset, which doesn't use DDR3. I could not carry any RAM over from my prior build. Had to buy completely new RAM. My philosophy on buying RAM is that don't buy the basic stuff and don't buy the super ultra extreme stuff. And there's a reason for that. So let's talk about that. The basic stuff, the stock speed for X99 is 2133, so 2133 megahertz. That is the stock speed that the X99 chipset runs at. For just a little bit more money, you can start looking at RAM that runs at 2400 megahertz. So just a little bit faster. And it's generally better stuff. I would assume that it is probably better stuff if it uses the same amount of voltage as the lower end stuff, which is 1.2 volts for the X99 chipset. If you're using 1.2 volts and you're getting a faster speed, it's generally a better quality memory chip on the DIMM, on the module itself. Now, if you go super extreme, and it's really not all that much more money, remember, you just small bump. Usually, there's always exceptions to all of this stuff, right? So the super ultra extreme fast stuff has a few problems. It's really nice. It is very nice. If you can get your RAM to run that fast, it's fantastic. However, the really ultra fast stuff is usually not sold in very large kits. So for what I do with the video editing, video rendering stuff, and everything else, I use 64 gigabytes of RAM, 64 gigabytes of system RAM. I could bump it up to 128, but that's expensive, and I have not ever run out of 64 gigabytes. 32 is cutting it pretty low when I do the editing thing, especially when I'm editing for 4K video, but 64 gigabytes is much more manageable, and I've never had a problem with 64 gigabytes. There's no reason to just push 128 for the hell of it. But anyway, the really high ultra extreme fast RAM is really never rated to run in full 64 gigabyte kits. You see it in pairs of 2 and pairs of 4 for dual channel, usually dual channel stuff like G.skill, which is who I happen to go with. G.skill just recently came out with some Trident Zs, and it says that it is made specifically for the Z170 platform, which is of course the latest Skylake chipset, and not the Haswell chipset. While it will still work in X99, it is not guaranteed to reach those speeds because you've got more cores. When you overclock the memory so high, they're not really taking into account that your CPU is going to be overclocked. So you can overclock them. It's like, CPU and RAM work together. So you've got an overclocked RAM, and your CPU is generally pretty low. If you overclock the CPU, you can't keep the RAM. This is a terrible thing, but you can't keep the RAM all that high. It's a trade-off. You can't just keep bumping both of them way up. It doesn't work like that because instability is easily introduced when these two things, they work together side by side. And when you've got all of the memory channels populated on the board, all 8 modules installed onto the board, it just takes one module to be the weakest link and to just mess up the other 7. So the more stuff you have, more cores, the more threads, the more memory modules, there's just all this room for error. So while you can purchase the ultra extreme fast stuff, and you can get it to run, you can likely get it to run if you're willing to overvolt the shit out of things and tweak and figure out and dial in settings that just work perfect for this RAM and this CPU, you can probably get it to that point. But that is a lot of micromanagement, and that is a lot of stability testing. My God. So my philosophy is don't go with either of those. Just pick something middle of the road with good timings, good speed, and a color that you like that's going to fit the board and the build and everything all together. So that's my philosophy. So that's why I went with 2800. Of course, like I mentioned in the build video, that I wasn't aware that 2800 required a base clock overclock to reach those numbers. I will revisit base clock overclocking likely when I get the new case and everything and the new step forward, the next evolution of the build comes into play. But right now, I just didn't want to mess with that, so I just stuck the memory at 2400 megahertz. It's faster than stock. It's G.skill. G.skill makes great stuff. Like I said, they just came out with Trident Zs. They're pretty much top of the game when it comes to memory, and I've always just wanted to try them. Used Corsair in the prior build. I think I even used Corsair one build back from that, but here, this time I was, open market. I had all this RAM to choose from. I went with G.skill. That's pretty much it. And I would go with G.skill again in the future because, like I said, they're top of their game. They make good stuff. They make really good stuff. So that's the RAM. Okay, so the motherboard. Obviously, we had to move to X99. I will keep kind of repeating myself in case people are jumping around the video. We had to move to X99. It required an entirely new motherboard from my X79 system. Couldn't just pop a new chip into the X79 board. Had to do everything new. So originally, here's a little backstory. Originally, the build, when I first initially purchased things last year, June of 2015, I had in my mind that the build was going to be a black and white build. So I was looking at Asus's X99 Deluxe motherboard. I believe that is the white board I was looking at. I don't have that information in front of me, but I believe that's it. What I also wanted to do was I wanted to go with Avexer's Raiden RAM. So if you're unfamiliar with that, they have the Raiden series RAM, at least at that time, was a white module with a little blue lightning tube on top. I thought that was very cool. Unfortunately, at that time, I had to put the build on hold because Avexer, I was really waiting for that Avexer RAM. And Avexer was dragging their ass on bringing their Raiden memory to the DDR4 market. They had plenty of DDR3, but there were no DDR4 options available. And of course, using X99, I had to go with DDR4. So I put the build on hold for a while, but I continued to research things and check to see if new boards were coming out or new memory was coming out and all this stuff, right? So I continued to research over the months. That was last summer. And again, I didn't purchase anything till like September, early October, end of September, somewhere right in that time period is when I actually purchased the remainder board, RAM, CPU. So throughout all this time, I'm doing research and I'm continually finding that Asus is getting some really bad reviews from people on both Amazon and Newegg and whatever other sites I was on, even hardware forums, that people were having issues with their Asus boards. And of course, this was first gen X99 stuff. So I'm really not sure if that had something to do with it. I'm also unsure, and it's impossible to know, whether these reviews were fake or the level of expertise that these people had, whether they were something that could really be fixed. Asus is a big player in the motherboard market. They obviously have a ton of customers. They're likely to have a lot of people that just kind of don't know what they're doing or they're first-time builders. Maybe a lot of those reviews could have just been user error. It's entirely possible. And then, of course, you look at those reviews that give people that give 1 star and they're like, the board was dead on arrival. 1-star review. I mean, what a waste of time. I don't know how these people feed themselves every day. But obviously, when you have a board that's dead on arrival, you don't review it because you can't, because it's dead. So what do? You return it and you get a new board that works. Obviously, Asus, they didn't test the board and it was broken at the factory and the boss was like, send it out anyway. Box it up and send it out. It was obviously working, right, when they sent it out. So for you to give a 1-star review and say, dead on arrival, never buy Asus again. God. You have to ignore those reviews is what I'm getting at. So, trying to dig through the negative reviews, really looking at trying to figure out if someone has a good level of expertise to them when they give an actual review. And there were a handful of those, and I was just starting to get a little scared, I guess. Put a little fear in the back of my mind. There could have been paid actors as far as I know as well. But, you also try to look at on Newegg and Amazon and other sites like that, they usually have some sort of badge that says verified buyer or verified purchase or something, right? So I try to look at those people as well. Give them a little bit more weight in their review. But not only that, I knew that if I had a bad ASUS board, that ASUS's RMA service is probably not the best available. I've had to deal with ASUS through RMA years and years ago, and while it wasn't a nightmare, it wasn't spectacular. And reading about these ASUS RMA nightmare stories over those months and even just the past years, they come up from time to time. I just did not want to, I didn't want a dead on arrival board. I didn't want a DOA board. And then I didn't want to have to deal with, if for some reason I wasn't able to get the board and everything working installed within 30 days of the return period from Newegg or Amazon, then I would have to deal with an ASUS RMA, right? So I was afraid that I may have to deal with ASUS RMA, and that really scared me. Whether it was actually founded or not, I'm not sure. Whether it was just in the back of my head, I don't know. But I have always wanted to go with MSI. So maybe it was easy for me to push myself away from ASUS and go with MSI because I've always wanted to try them as a motherboard maker. Just like I've always wanted to try g.skill for RAM, I've always wanted to try MSI for motherboards. So it was an easy choice. I was like, I'll just, no ASUS this time. We'll start looking at MSI. And of course, Gigabyte was an option as well. But they think at the time they were doing more, they do weird color schemes sometimes, like they have like neon orange and neon green. So that really wasn't what I was looking for. But MSI obviously didn't have a lot of white options. So we just switched it up to black and red. Plus it made it easier for me to just keep everything else black and red since the chassis is black and red. And that's that. Yeah, ASUS Godlike board. Oh, so the Godlike. Why did I go with the Godlike and not anything else? So the Godlike was not a first gen X99 board. So it didn't come out when X99 was released. And what I just assume, and this is just an assumption, it is just a guess, that MSI released their other X99 gaming boards and everything when X99 came out. But the Godlike didn't come out till at least a year after X99 was already out. So it was more like a revision board, right? I'm assuming that MSI probably learned some things based upon their other boards. They implemented that new technology, the new ideas, and all that stuff into the Godlike. So I went with the Godlike. I paid the extra money to go with the Godlike, and I'm not disappointed. I really have nothing to compare it to. It's not like I could say, this is the best board I've ever used. I haven't used another X99 board, so I really can't say that. It's a very, very nice board. By all means, it is a very, very nice board. Lots of good reviews on it, but it is kind of hard to get a bad motherboard review. I'm talking about actual review site reviews this time. So, it is what it is. It matched the color scheme. A lot of people hated it, and I wasn't sure why. They were all judging it before it even came out. But once it came out, people were changing their minds about the board. So I went with the Godlike. And that's the motherboard story. Okay, so the GPUs. GPUs have a little bit of a story to them. There's a little bit of backstory. There was a big dilemma that I had to decide upon, that I found myself in. So the Titan X's, how did I come to purchasing these? It wasn't an easy choice, but Titan X's were released before the 980 Ti's. They were released back in March or April of 2015, and then the 980 Ti's came out like 2 months later, end of May, early June, sometime around there. Now, the Titan X is the full, uncut, uncensored GM200 chip. It has everything working on it that it's supposed to. The 980 Ti is a slightly cut down chip, so it has less texture units, it has less CUDA cores. CUDA cores I don't think affect you at gaming whatsoever. CUDA cores I do use for video stuff though. So there was just that little bit of the 980 Ti being cut down. But the big thing was the video RAM. Remember earlier I said I wanted to start recording and doing stuff in 4K. And 4K is no joke of a resolution. If you currently play at 1080, 4K is 4 times the size of 1080. It is a 300% increase from 1080. 4K is 4 1080 screens in a quadrant. That's what 4K is. So it takes a lot of video RAM to run. It takes a lot of GPU to process everything that's on the screen. And me being the person that loves to play at close to max settings, even when multiboxing, I needed something as powerful as I could get. So the 980 Ti was really, really powerful. But like I said, only 6 gigabytes of video RAM. And I can't tell you how long I went back and forth with this question. Is 6 gigabytes going to be enough video RAM for me to multibox at 4K with 5 game clients in basically World of Warcraft? Because that's where I do the majority of my multiboxing. And ultimately, I came to the decision that it wasn't. It wasn't going to be enough. I only had 780 Ti's at that time. They only had 3 gigabytes of video RAM. So based upon just a single client, I just did rough math, and I came to the number that I was going to be above 6 gigabytes. And I'll put something on the screen here that shows that I indeed do use more than 6 gigabytes. So I was very relieved when I bought those Titan X's. I was very relieved that I was using more than 6 gigabytes, because I would have been really let down if I wasted all that additional money. We're talking $350 difference between 980 Ti and Titan X. If I wasted all of that money on GPUs that I really didn't need at all. So the screenshot shows that I'm at about 8 gigabytes of video RAM, which is interesting because the GTX 1080, NVIDIA's GTX 1080 just came out a few days ago. It only has 8 gigabytes of video RAM. I say only, but as a multi-boxer, it doesn't matter at 4K. Clearly, I would have been maxing the RAM out on the 1080 as well. So the Titan X was like a double whammy. It was better than the 980 Ti option at that time. And right now, in terms of video RAM, it's better than the 1080 for me and what I do. Now, of course, I could just turn down some settings and stay under the 8 gigabyte mark. And I may have been able to turn down enough settings to stay under the 6 gigabyte mark with 980 Ti's. But I really love presentation, the presentation value of my videos. I think having really nice settings just really adds to those videos overall. And ultimately, I think these Titan X's are going to last me well into 2017 until we see another big monster GPU with a lot of RAM on it. So I think I'll be able to even skip the next GP102 GPUs, which are rumored to come out at the end of this year, early next year. So I think I can even skip those. I think I'm going to be good. I think I can even survive all the way throughout Legion, the next expansion for World of Warcraft. I think I can even survive all throughout Legion on these Titan X's. But clearly, I have 3 of them, right? But of course, I only have 2 installed. This is the main problem I face with the system at this point in time. If you look at that same footage, you'll see that the GPUs are pushing high 80s, low 90s in terms of load. Now, I am recording with Shadowplay, and it does bump the GPU usage up a little bit, but I saw that back last year when I was doing my testing, and I thought, because I only bought 2 Titan X's initially, and I thought I might need a third one. So right before I did that MBX vlog video, I bought that third one, and I've never really been able to use it since then, which is an absolute joke. But hopefully within the next 30 days, let's not put any numbers or dates on things. Hopefully soonish, we will be running all 3 of those. Finally. So that's the GPUs, right? That is the GPUs. It wasn't an easy decision. It was not an easy decision. But at this point, having seen what GTX 1080s have in store, I'm pretty glad that I went with the GPU that had 12 gigabytes of video RAM, and I think I'm set for some time. So ultimately, it was a good purchase. It was. Okay, so the power supply. There's really not much about the power supply. It is just a power supply, but there's a little bit of a funny story here. I initially wanted the T2. I wanted the titanium version. So I do have the P2, which is the platinum, but if you're unfamiliar with the way that power supply rating badges go, it goes bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and then titanium. So titanium is the top, most efficient power supply that you can buy. But really, it's fine that I don't have the titanium. The titanium was really just there to extend the size of my E-peen a few extra centimeters. That's pretty much all that was there for. But Yeah, if you pay attention to the price list of the P2 that I have in the PC parts list thing, I mark it down as $200 when in reality it's actually a $400 power supply. I got it for 50% off, and that's why I just went with it at the time. I didn't know that EVGA was doing a promotion where if you bought a Titan X or a 980 Ti in a certain period of time, you had a 30-day promotion period to buy a power supply and or a mouse for 50% off. So you could do both or one or the other for 50% off, and that's per GPU that you bought, which was fantastic. So I saw that and I'm thinking, I could use the titanium. It's in stock. And I was like, I bought all this. I bought the display. I bought the GPUs. I bought the chassis all within like a 30-day period. And I was like, I am going to hold off on spending some money right now. But then like a week later, I'm looking at this and I'm like, 50% off is kind of a lot because this power supply is over $400. I'm talking about the titanium version at the time. But I talked myself into buying it, and I go back to the store at EVGA, and of course the titanium version is out of stock. So I waited till like the last 3 days that I had the coupon available for 50% off, and I was like, all right, forget it. I'm just going to get the P2 version. EVGA said they're not getting the T2 back in stock for at least another few weeks. I might as well just get the P2. It's 50% off. It's still $200 I'm saving. I might as well just get it. So that's how I arrived at the P2 power supply rather than the T2. So it is 1600 watts, and I figured that if I had 2 GPUs and a CPU at that current point in time, overclocking all of them, overvolting all of them potentially, I was going to be using a lot of voltage and a lot of wattage. And I knew that there was always a possibility I would go 3-way SLI even at that point in time, so I wanted to kind of make sure I had a lot of headroom in case I did go 3-way SLI. And I can even go 4-way SLI, I believe. But I'd rather not do that. But that's why we went with the 1600 watt power supply. And that's the power supply. Okay, so we can briefly touch on storage. Not really, again, just like the power supply, there's not really any real stories behind this. It's just, I like Samsung. They use their own in-house controller for their SSDs. So I like that. It performs well. They make really good SSDs. They have fantastic warranties on their SSDs. And that's it. I mean, they make a good product, so I buy their stuff. The only thing maybe I'm a little bummed out about is the fact that the SM951, I guess there's 2 things I'm bummed out about with the SM951. First of all, it's green, right? So it sticks out like a sore thumb on the motherboard, when everything else is black and red. This thing is green. But I guess there's 3 things. So first of all, it's green and it sticks out. Not really a big deal because it is buried underneath the GPUs there, but regardless. The second thing is that Samsung has their own SSD software. It's called Magician, and it detects Samsung products and drives. And you can do a few extra tweaks to them and do some things and change some options and whatnot. It's not really Samsung only stuff. These are just options you can do in Windows, but Magician puts the options all in one place for you to manage that way. Now, the problem is that Magician doesn't see the SM951 as a Samsung product. It doesn't read it and give me the same details about the drive, like the amount of bytes or gigabytes or terabytes that have been written to the drive and how much life is left on it and whatnot. Now I can look at the smart data and figure that out, but it's just kind of weird that their own Magician software does not see the SM951 as their drive. So the third thing is that I bought the SM951 and then M.2 SSD drives, they were just so new to me, I was not doing a ton of research on them. And I didn't know that Samsung was coming out with a 950 Pro only a few weeks later. So I could have waited. I could have gotten the 950 Pro, which is black, matches the black and red build, and is also, I believe, detected by Magician as a Samsung device. So I don't know. It's not really a big deal. But that's the story behind the storage. Now, I guess maybe I'll talk about the Asus Raider. It is carried over from my prior build, and I don't really like it. I don't really like that drive all that much. What happened was that back when I first got it, I tried to multi-box off of it, and I was constantly running into weird stuttering issues. And I was not getting this stuttering on a traditional SSD. So I kind of ditched it as my multi-boxing drive at that point. I thought it was supposed to be faster and better, but it seemed to have some bottleneck problems somewhere along the way, and I just was never able to figure that out. So what I use it for now is my temporary drive. I use it as my scratch disk and my temporary drive for all my video editing and video rendering and whatnot. So that's it. It just sits there for that. Yeah, that's it. Expensive PCI Express drive that I bought a few years ago that does nothing but act as a scratch disk. That's it. So that's storage. So finally, I guess we could talk about the chassis. It's not really hardware, but it is part of the build here. If there is a waste of money, this is it. This is it. And I'll tell you the problem. And I might touch on this again in the modification water cooling video. The fact of the matter is that I bought it. I saw it for sale. Then I did some research on it. I realized that it's the limited edition. It came out earlier that year. I saw it last summer, of course. It came out early 2015. Limited edition, only 500 units. I'm like, this thing looks great. I saw some preliminary builds with it, and it looked just so sexy. It's incredible. It's a very unique, very, very unique chassis. Now, InWin is a crazy case/chassis designer. They're like the Ferrari or the Lamborghini of chassis. Seriously, their latest H-Frame 2.0, I think it ranges anywhere from $1,700 to $2,400 for a case. Just a case. It comes with LEDs built onto it. It's very fancy, and it does come with a power supply that matches the color scheme. But that's a lot of money for a case. That's not a full-built computer right there. That is just the case, right? So they make some crazy, crazy shit. And the thing that really turned me on about this is that this chassis, they're all hand bent. The red and black, there is a yellow and black version as well. It's not limited edition, and I don't think they actually sell it anymore anyway. So it was perhaps limited edition, but it doesn't have a badge on it like the red and black ones do. But they're hand bent. They're not machine bent. They're machine assisted. What that means is they heat up. It's a one piece of aluminum, or pretty sure it's aluminum. Whatever it is, the piece of metal. Yeah, I think it's aluminum. It's one piece. And they take it to these machines. They heat up the edges, and they bend them, around a large piece of equipment. So it's not a machine that's doing these bendings. They're not perfect. They're not ultra perfect bends by any means. And you can see how they're off just a little bit because it's just humans bending this case. And that's why they only made so many of them, I'm guessing, because they have to do that by hand. And that's probably why it's so damn expensive as well. So it was $700 for the chassis, which is incredibly expensive. I thought it was so cool though. So what I was planning to do was I was first planning to do air cooling. I even bought, when I said I wanted to go white and black build at first before moving to black and red, I even bought a white air cooler for the CPU at that point in time. But I always wanted the option to go water cooling if I so chose to do so. And the InWin S-Frame does have a spot to put in a 360 millimeter radiator. Now, having never water cooled before, I was under the incorrect impression, that it only took 120 millimeters of radiator to cool any component on a computer. We're talking whether it's a CPU or a GPU, whether it's a $1,000 CPU or whether it's a $200 CPU or a $1,000 GPU or a $150 GPU. They're all the same. That's the incorrect notion that I was under. Obviously, it was incorrect. When I went to decide to water cool, I quickly learned that you cannot put all of those components on just one 360 millimeter radiator. So at that point, that's why the GPUs stayed on air, because I thought they would be okay on air. Turns out that they're not okay on air, but that was my error. Had I known that I could not cool everything on one single 360 millimeter radiator, I probably would not have bought the Ferrari case. Probably not. And I would have gone with a proper case at the time, like I just bought recently, just a few weeks ago. And we'll be here shortly. But if I would have done that to begin with, I would have saved a lot of money and the build would have been done already. So, I mean, ultimately, the thing that's holding me up, I would say, was the fact that this case just does not have good cooling. And I can't, my lack of expertise in the water cooling field is just, was just at that time just wrong. It was wrong, totally wrong. So it was a mistake. It was a total mistake. This is something that I can consider to be a waste of money. But I am going to keep the chassis. We're going to pull everything out of that chassis. And I'm going to move my 4930K build into that InWin S-Frame, leave all the water cooling stuff in place, and just water cool the older machine as well. So, because we've got some crazy plans for the new machine. So, Yeah, that's it. I think I covered everything. If there's anything I missed, anything at all, any questions you have, please just ask in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. I think that's it. So thank you for watching. It's been a very long video, but thank you for watching. As always, my name is Mirai, and I'll see you in the next video.